So it turns out Israel is planning to maintain air superiority over Iran, which is a pretty stark reminder that the core issues here remain unresolved. I mean, yes, the United States and Israel have accomplished some pretty crazy feats in the last few weeks, but we shouldn't mistake that for overall mission accomplishment. I mean, as we sit here today, Iran continues to openly threaten Israel and the United States. They've publicly stated that they're going to continue their enrichment of uranium, and by all accounts, there's a fair amount of that already enriched uranium completely unaccounted for, which, isn't great. So overall, there's still a need for a diplomatic or military solution here, and we're going to start with the military side. Now, just yesterday, Israeli Defense Minister Katz put out a statement saying, quote, "I instructed the IDF to prepare an enforcement plan against Iran that includes maintaining Israel's air superiority, preventing nuclear advancement and missile production, and responses to Iran for supporting terrorist activities against the state of Israel. We will act consistently to thwart threats of this kind. I suggest to the toothless snake's head in Tehran to understand and beware. Operation With a Lion was just the preview of a new Israeli policy. After October 7th, immunity is over." And President Trump, for his part, echoed similar sentiments, saying that if needed, he has no problem sending back in U.S. forces to conduct strikes on Iran. That reads like Israel saying we are going to enforce the ceasefire. But a problem, and we're going to get into this more detail here in a moment, is there are no terms of this ceasefire. It was really just the two sides saying, cool, or three sides, I guess, saying we're not going to fight anymore for now. There's nothing about Iranian enrichment or the dismantling of their nuclear facilities, the things you would actually need to get to in some sort of, say, diplomatic agreement. Now, sticking with the military side here, we don't have a lot of new information on the battle damage assessments. This has been so exhausting, but I did feel like it was worth bringing up a couple statements from U.S. senators after they received a classified briefing from the U.S. intelligence community. Senator Blumenthal, a Democrat here, says, quote, "After today's briefing on the Iran strikes, anyone who says we know with certainty the full outcome of this attack is making it up. I'm in awe of the skill and bravery of our military in hitting Iranian nuclear assets, but there's been no final assessment about the degree of damage. I certainly wouldn't use the word obliterated." And to hammer home, no doubt, an incredibly successful operation in terms of the secrecy involved, the operation, actually carrying the operation out with our service members at home and abroad, and then dropping multiple bombs directly onto the desired target, one after the other, and then coming back home safely. Senator Tom Cotton was a bit more optimistic. He said, quote, "This report was preliminary, was done with low confidence, and was done with numerous intelligence gaps that could lead to a broad range of conclusions. It was not part of the mission to destroy all of their enriched uranium or to seize it or anything else. The damage done to Iran's vast nuclear infrastructure is an extraordinary success." And that part is key here because there's a lot of debate still, and I've not seen any new information about the damage done to the underground facilities, specifically a little bit at Natanz, but mostly at Fordo. We have nothing new there. Really, it's just media talking about what other media says, and it's, again, exhausting. This component here does not seem to be debated at all. From the IAEA to U.S. representatives to, quite frankly, Iran themselves, it sounds like there is some enriched uranium, or all of the enriched uranium. We don't know where it is, and it was not deliberately targeted in these strikes. In fact, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Kane, briefed lawmakers as well, and he stated that the U.S. military did not use the massive ordnance penetrator, the GBU-57, against the Isfahan site because the site there is so deep that the bombs likely would not have been effective. Notably, there we have footage that Iran, just in the last couple days, appears to have been opening up some of the areas that were covered, looks like probably for some sort of protection lead up to Israeli and U.S. strikes. It's believed that this is one of the locations where Iran, if it's that deep that our bombs couldn't even get there, it's entirely possible, and it's being speculated right now that that might be the location where at least some of this highly enriched uranium was moved before the strikes were carried out. The article continues by saying, U.S. officials believe Isfahan's underground structures house nearly 60% of Iran's enriched uranium stockpile. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy told CNN after receiving the briefing that some of Iran's capabilities are so far underground that we can never reach them. So they have the ability to move a lot of what has been saved into areas where there's no American bombing capacity that can reach it. And then Republican Representative Greg Murphy told CNN, quote, "The purpose of the mission was to eliminate certain particular aspects of the nuclear program. Those were eliminated. To get rid of the nuclear material, the enriched uranium, was not a part of that mission." And I think that's really important that we're starting to see a split on those two items, calling out that's not what we were going after. I think it really drives home the fact that that enriched uranium is still out there. And Iran, for their part, has said that they moved it ahead of time. And the IAEA said Iran told us they moved it. Where it is exactly and who's monitoring it now, not public information is probably the best way to put it. Now, when turning over to the diplomatic side that might be necessary here, again, because even if we move away from the obliterate gate, right, was the nuclear infrastructure underground actually destroyed or not, and just look at the enriched uranium alone, that's not even getting into the Iranian support for proxy networks, for their proxy networks, or their ballistic missile program, even just the uranium needs to be taken care of. Like, what are we going to do with that? It's clearly not resolved at this point. And NPR put together a good list, in my assessment, of some experts talking about just that. Hey, no matter what, we need to get to negotiations. And President Trump has talked about that in recent days as well. It sounds like that's the direction he's trying to get us to move in. But in this article, they said Trump said that at the summit, the NATO summit this past week, that he had plans to talk with Iran next week, but he didn't think it was necessary to come to a deal with Iran over abandoning its nuclear ambitions. Personally, I disagree with that at this point. A lot of what President Trump is saying is that, he said, we may sign an agreement. I don't think it's necessary, reiterating the success of the U.S. strikes. Again, if every one of those bombs at Fordo was 110% successful and everything underneath that mountain has been turned to dust, there is still a need to do something more here. Iran is still developing their ballistic missile program. They still pose a threat to the United States and our regional allies and Iran's neighbors. They likely still have a significant amount of enriched uranium, and they still have the know-how to pursue a nuclear weapons program. So I think we're at risk right now, actually, here in the United States, of spiking the football too early and celebrating a victory when really the door might be open now to get to that victory, but we are not there yet. They quote Eli Germanmaya, no way I got that right, a senior policy fellow and Iran expert at the European Council on Foreign Relations, who said, quote, "This ceasefire, in my view, is going to be very short-lived for both the Israelis and the Americans unless there's a very serious political strategy and President Trump essentially takes that leap." Dana Stroll, who's the Pentagon's top Middle East official between 2001 and 2023, said the need for negotiations as soon as possible is a priority. Quote, This is a very unusual way to approach a ceasefire. There's nothing written down, nothing articulated, no timeline, and no identified mechanism for how to mediate accusations of cheating. And, for anybody who felt like they're taking crazy pills these last few days, I think that's important to note right there. We've been trying to cover the Ukraine-Russia ceasefire negotiations, and it's just the back and forth and up and down and what's on the table and not. And there's all of these terms that keep getting batted around to even get to a ceasefire, let alone an actual negotiated end of the war. And we're so used to that because that's normally how ceasefires play out, even with Israel and Hamas. There's a lot of back and forth and up and down, and what are the terms going to be? All of those negotiations that they've been going through for years now is not about ending the conflict. The ceasefire is step one. So we're used to having a lot of back and forth to get to even a ceasefire, but in this case, it was essentially just declared. Ceasefire, everybody good? Got it. Ceasefire. Stop fighting for right now. Again, the core issues here were not entirely addressed. Dana Stroll again says, quote, "The Iranian regime has invested decades in its nuclear program and has an unparalleled amount of resources. So to think that after less than 2 weeks, they are just going to take a knee and abandon their entire nuclear ambitions is a short-sighted approach." I think that's probably pretty accurate, right? No doubt Iran took a beating these last few weeks. I mean, by all accounts, just the United States strikes had to have been humbling for Iran. The fact that we flew these B-2s halfway around the world, not a single Iranian air defense asset fired a shot in their own defense. And we put bomb after bomb after bomb on these secret, hidden underground nuclear facilities. That alone should be concerning, and that's just scratching the surface. I mean, the real damage here has been what Israel did to the air defense networks and missile capabilities and Iranian leadership in the 11 or so days leading up to that. So no doubt, Iran took a bashing in a lot of ways, but there's still more that needs to be looked at here. One thing that's worth keeping in mind is I get the impression that President Trump always likes to bundle a lot of things together and get a big deal, something that he can push through. I wouldn't write it off entirely. It's possible that Trump is maybe looking at using this, some sort of negotiated settlement with Iran, and maybe he loops in the return of the hostages from Hamas. Iran does have some sway over Hamas, no doubt. Maybe he's going to try to pull this all together into some sort of big, grand Middle East bargain. Possible. At the same time, we don't exactly know if negotiations are back on the table, but a part of that is, will Iran be willing to negotiate at all? I mean, if you look at how these last few weeks played out, there is an incredible article that I'll link in the description below called Inside Operation Narnia, the daring attack Israel feared it couldn't pull off. And it talks about the opening hours of this strike, the opening operations, hitting military sites, the people operating inside of Iran, agents and Israeli operatives, and then hitting the nuclear and military officials. And they talk about the deception that was at play here. And this is important when looking at what does this all mean going forward. They talk about how, if you recall, if you were following this, there were leaks leading up to the strikes talking about how there was a split between Netanyahu and Trump. It included the details of a phone call 4 days before the operation in which Trump told the Israeli leader he wanted diplomacy to run its course before turning to military options. It says the day of the attacks, Trump told reporters that the U.S. and Iran were, quote, fairly close to an agreement and that he did not want the Israelis going in. It says, in fact, Israeli aircraft were getting in the air. Trump posted on Truth Social, we remain committed to a diplomatic resolution to the Iran nuclear issue. Now, there's a couple different ways to interpret this. Technically, I have not heard the United States come out or President Trump come out and say that this was all a deception. But you can see how Iran might view it that way. I think it's increasingly unlikely that Israel went this alone. It sounds like they had briefed the United States on this operation quite a while before it took place. If that is true, that means that some of President Trump's statements here were deliberately misleading, saying we remain, deception in war, it's incredibly important, right? And could have, in this case, saved the lives of our pilots flying overhead, so need it. But if he is saying, as the Israeli aircraft are getting in the air, we remain committed to a diplomatic resolution, that makes Iran feel like maybe they've got some more time, right? And then, of course, just a few hours after he publishes that post, Iran is getting hit. Some of their senior leaders are being eliminated. You have to wonder if, looking at that, will Iran come back to the negotiating table right now? A concern that they have voiced in just the last few months in starting these negotiations with President Trump is saying, we can't trust you because every time there's a new administration in the White House, you have different rules and different approaches for how you're going to address Iran and what you're going to do around the nuclear issue. And look, I'm no fan of the Iranian regime, but there is a valid point there, right? Why negotiate and go through all of this up, down, and sideways, knowing that it's probably going to be a different approach 2 years after you actually ink the deal? And now in this case, Iran can add to that, hey, last time we sat down with you guys and started negotiating, bombs started falling. Like, you were working with Israel to allow those strikes to begin taking place. So I wouldn't automatically assume that Iran is ready to go back to the negotiating table in good faith right now, which should be a concern. Now, there's also been a bit of a spat between Trump and Khamenei. We reported yesterday or a couple days ago how the Ayatollah was talking about the great victory and how Trump kind of got out over his skis and they had to withdraw and they asked for the ceasefire. Trump didn't like that, turns out. So he had a long post on Truth Social yesterday where he said, I'm just going to read parts of it. He says, why would the so-called supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, of the war-torn country of Iran, say so blatantly and foolishly that he won the war with Israel when he knows his statement is a lie? It is not so. As a man of great faith, he is supposed to not lie. His country was decimated, and 3 evil nuclear sites were obliterated. And I know exactly where he was sheltered and would not let Israel or the United States Armed Forces, by the way, the greatest and most powerful in the world, terminate his life. I saved him from a very ugly and ignominious death, and he does not have to say, quote, thank you, President Trump. During the last few days, I was working on the possible removal of sanctions and other things, which would have given a much better chance to Iran at a full, fast, and complete recovery. The sanctions are biting, but no. Instead, I get hit with the statement of anger, hatred, and disgust, and immediately dropped all work on sanctions relief and more. So I don't know, maybe those trolling comments by Khamenei don't completely fly under the radar. Trump noticed, Trump got upset, and it sounds like we're not making any movement on sanctions relief, which again seems like something we should probably wait until we're actually negotiating something here. Maybe that was going to be a carrot offered to Iran, but nonetheless, it's off the table. And Iran had some things to say about this. The chief spokesperson for the IRGC, General Naini, said, quote, talking about Trump, "We advise him to open his eyes and stop his nonsense statements and erratic behavior. Trump still has no grasp of the true sources of Iran's strengths. As the leader of the Islamic Revolution rightly said, quote, he speaks bigger than his mouth can handle. This is our final message to the Zionist regime and the delusional president of the United States. If Iran's national interests and assets are violated once again, our response will be different, more crushing, and more devastating this time. In a way, it will accelerate the process of the downfall of the Zionist regime." Now, let's say that Khamenei and Trump decide to stop posting insults at each other for a short period. A lot of Khamenei's were actually direct jabs at Trump, which is interesting. Let's say they put that all aside and the two countries decide, we're going to sit down, we're going to start talking this through. There's still some issues here because the Iranian representative of the United Nations yesterday just addressed this, saying, quote, "Iran will not accept any restrictions on its missile activities. The recent aggression demonstrated clearly that without Iran's military capabilities, the other side never would have been compelled to request a ceasefire." So the way they're framing this is, why would we give up the one thing that made you guys come to the table in the first place? If we didn't have these missiles, now it's debatable whether or not the 14 missiles fired at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar was the thing that forced the United States to say, we've actually had enough. We got to back out here, which is the Iranian claim. But nonetheless, they're saying, if it wasn't for that, we'd still be fighting. So why are we going to give that up? They say, quote, "One of the key reasons a ceasefire has not been observed in Gaza or has not been enforced by the occupying regime in Lebanon is that the retaliatory power of the resistance groups has not yet reached a level sufficient to bring the real heat on the regime or make it vulnerable. By contrast, Iran's forceful military response inflicted serious pain on the regime's social, political, and economic sections. Therefore, Iran will never agree to relinquish such an effective strategic lever, nor will it allow itself to be disarmed in the face of potential future attacks." So if you really step back and look at this big picture, I have no doubt that Iran is weaker today than they were a couple weeks ago before these military operations began, but they're drawing the exact same hard lines that they always have. No touching the ballistic missile program. The development there is still going to continue. They will continue their enrichment of uranium and not even addressing the support of the regional proxies. So, yes, the issue is not completely resolved here. And from what I can tell, I would say that Israel and the United States have more leverage today than they did 2 weeks ago. They've exposed the Iranian air defense network. Israel appears to be maintaining air superiority over portions of Iran. But, when you actually sit down at the table, if Iran does do that, their starting point still, from what we can tell publicly, is the exact same as it was a few weeks ago. So there's still a fair amount of work to be done here. But that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.